It was a regular, sunny day at the station. A few cases of theft and vandalism from stupid kids in the morning. But what can you do? Kids will be kids, you know? It was just a regular day, lazing on my old and expired desk chair, floating around on the wheels to gather papers and then drink some coffee. That day, though, proved to be anything but normal. It began with the siren. Now we do have a hospital nearby, so hearing a siren was nothing too special. But what was something noteworthy was the siren of a police car following the ambulance. From my view of the front, I saw them both rush through the road in record speed, blink, and they were gone. And that was definitely weird. But soon, the sleepiness struck. Taking a sip and allowing the caffeine into the system, I forgot about the incident and continued shuffling papers. It wasn't until later that I got any info on what was going on. Jack was a cheerful lad, new to the force. He was the guy you'd go to if you needed a smile. There was something about his smile, demeanor, and of course his humor. Today, though, it was anything but that. Trying to talk to him, he shot me down quickly enough. No smile, and a haunting look in his eyes. No emotion at all as he dropped off a box to be archived and quickly left, not even turning when I asked him what the stuff was. Now that was really strange. Jack, for the few months I had known him, was never like that. Shaking it off as something spooking him, I picked up the box and went aside to the storage rooms. On the way, something caught my eye. Inside the box, an aged and decrepit book. Now I knew my responsibilities. Get what was given and then archive it away in its correct section as evidence for whatever may occur in the future. But the book was right there, something drawing it to me. If I peeked just a little, it wouldn't hurt, would it? Putting the rest of the stuff away, old, dirty clothes, a brand new chess set, some glass shards, and a family picture. I picked up the book, opening it to the first page. Nothing. That was odd. Flipping through, there wasn't anything, apart from dirt and old water stains. That was, until I reached the last page. Disclosed below is what I found. The youth lay in the inky depths of quotidian night, staring at the gray, peeling paint of his ceiling. Seconds ticked by, a chaotic jumble in his head, eyes aflutter. The midnight darkness had done little to dull Malian to sleep. Surrounding him, a dim room, sparsely populated. The moonlit clock, the familiar pictures, the dawning mirror, and the brass chess set he had received just days prior. Malian, troubled by his constant insomnia, peered at his ever-so-steady mahogany clock to his side, watching as it transitioned to 23:56. There was a ruffling in his periphery, soliciting his sleepless eyes to the dull, moonlit visage in his mirror. Then to a picture on his wall as he stared at the framed photo. A photo of a time long lost. A wave of longing overcame him. The pain seethed powerfully in his stomach, yet he forced his eyes back to the clock. 23:57. Prompted by the sound of dissent, he glanced briefly to the many pieces that had fallen from the board. Brass bodies scattered on the floor. He heaved a sigh of pain, a sigh of longing, a sigh for a time so delicately suspended in the crystalline depths of a long-lost past. He heaved a sigh and forced himself to his feet, his body aching with each movement. He truly wanted to remain in the comfort of the sheets, remain in the comfort of some vague hope it'll dull the pain. Yet, he knew it wouldn't. Taking careful steps across the creaky wooden floors, he walked to the fallen chessboard. He stopped reluctantly where the pieces lay scattered and kneeled. Picking up the black queen, he rolled her delicately between his fingers, the cold brass kissing his warm hands. you know you failed. His fingers stopped, a glint of fear filling his bloodshot eyes as he gazed at the clock, his heartbeat quickening. 23:58. There was no one else in the room. He must be imagining things. The voice was still resonating in his ears. He looked down, his vision fixated on the lifeless queen grasped in his palm. She'll never like you. He dropped her and fell back, scrambling across the floor until his back slammed into the cold mahogany wood of his bedside. He stared helplessly at the shadow of the scattered set as it slowly oozed across the floorboards towards him. They left a dull trail of death and decay in their wake. He whimpered as that familiar feeling overcame him. He stared, desperation filling him, at the clock. He refused to let his focus break, not even for a second. From the dual hands of the clock before him, 23:59. As it reached his feet, its shrill voice broke through the night, assaulting him over and over again. A stabbing sensation gripped his arms and legs as he kept the pressure of the bedside at his back, hoping maybe that he could fall all the way through the wall. Don't do that, you idiot. You'll embarrass yourself. Your friends are right about you, you know. You're an annoying waste. You're fat, ugly, and disgusting. Constant assault, constant streams of insults and half-truths, beating him around the head until his ears began to ring. As tears streamed down his face, he pulled his legs against his body, tightly gripping them, as if holding on to the edge of his life. 00. As he opened his eyes, the warm tears trailing down his face were no longer. His body, curled up and quivering, was no longer against the wall, and the chess set had vanished. He looked at his timepiece. 2 bloody fingers continued to taunt him. 23:56. He sighed deeply. He would never find sleep. Standing up from his torn bedsheets, he stepped on a damp, rotten floorboard below him, forcing himself once again onto his feet. He walked across the room to the mirror. Looking into it, he saw himself, gaunt and hollow, with black rings around his eyes, a constant reminder of his insomnia. A dull shine against the mirror's edge revealed years of cracks. He palmed his hand against the cold glass, looking down at the decaying, splintered boards. The clock behind him striking 23:57. What's wrong with me? His raspy voice echoing around the silent, dying room. There's nothing wrong with us. A sharp, clear, taunting voice responded. Time seemed to stop. He gasped for air, as if he had been punched. Blood thumped in his ear as the words, "There's nothing wrong with us," resounded over and over again. He moved his head slowly, fearfully gazing into the reflection before him. There he was, the same weary eyes, the same tousled hair, the same ripped shirt. His lips, however, were not the same familiar manner. They were twisted maniacally into a grin of a lost mind. The timepiece continued to tick. 23:58. Who are you? Malian uttered nervously, not quite meeting the eyes of his reflection. More accurately, its eyes. I am you. You are me. We are us. And there is nothing wrong with us, stated the double, confidence and charisma oozing out of him. Their horrific smile, wide and threatening like a shark, showed rotting dark gums and multiple rows of glistening white teeth. Malian, his fear now giving way to curiosity, palmed the glass again, watching the reflection move his hands with him, the feeling of cold glass transforming to the warm touch of a friend. But they say so much about me. They call me fat, annoying. and they make fun of my scars. I'm worthless. I have no friends. His voice broke as he mumbled everything in his mind. You're so confident and charismatic, while I'm so shy and anxious. How could you be me? The ticking behind him, telling him that it was 23:59. He felt the agony fall down his tear-stained cheeks as his reflection approached him. You're right. You are worthless. The tears stopped as if a well had dried up, shock enveloping him as he looked at his reflection. Now much closer, eyes flashing, jaw wide and twisted. Wouldn't it be so much better if you were gone and I replaced you? His reflection taunted, his voice becoming darker, replacing the sharp, confident voice with a murky growl. Malian backed away from the mirror, the fear coming back, twisting his intestines to a pulp. Because I am better than you could ever be, the figure stated with finality, as he launched himself through the mirror, his long and sharp fangs baring themselves. Malian's eyes widened in fear as time seemed to slow. Resigning himself to his fate, he closed his eyes. 000. He waited for the attack, but after one breath, 2 breaths, he opened his eyes. Rubbing the mucus from his eyes, he realized he was back in bed. Around him, the room was in a mess, the walls crumpling with strange, slimy pustules, his bedsheets ripped off and worn, as the hard mattress oozed out rotting cloth. His eyes completely dazed, his body uncharacteristically relaxed, as he glanced at the timepiece, melted and deformed, the 2 bloody and broken fingers showing 23:56. The dulling mirror's absence did not seem to worry him. Shifting his eyes to the side of his bed, he stepped on the softened and moist floorboards, listening as it creaked ominously, as if too much weight would crumble and cause him in the room to collapse. Making his slow and careful advance through the room, his eyes still blank with emotion, he moved to the one item that meant something to him, the picture. Picking it up from the destroyed desk, the rotting smell of its frame hit his nostrils, but he did not care. He forced his eyes to focus on the strange image. His family, his father, his mother, his friends, all of them staring at him. And there he was, in the center, looking back, bliss in his eyes and an elated smile. He tried to smile at the memory now, but all he could manage was a grimace. He stayed like that for minutes, hours, days. He could not say, and he did not care as he relentlessly tried to memorize every detail, every element, every feature. The clock idly ticking to 23:57. His eyes kept their hawkish gaze on those smiling faces until they weren't smiling. His eyes widened as he saw the brilliant smiles turn into dark frowns. Their bright, shining eyes turned into fountains of blood. He dropped the photo, watching it break and tear on the floor as his heart broke with it. He backed away in sadness, his happiest memory shattered, now dripping with black ash forming from the picture. Frozen in shock and despair, he watched a creature rise, reaching higher and higher, towering over him now, before it locked into place. A veil blocking its eyes, as it nonetheless stared deep into him, an uncanny silence filling the room as the ashy humanoid stood, the tension palpable, daring one of them to say something. Then a sudden, violent lurch, and its slimy hands covered Malian's shoulders. The clock's tick transformed into a horrific shriek as it reached 23:58. You are worthless, you are repulsive, and you do not deserve happiness. It spoke with an aggressive and hateful spite. I will always be here to make you suffer, because you created me for that purpose. Malian's eyes widened as his tears were replaced with a terrible fear. His body slacked and tensed as the creature's hands increased the strength of its grip on his shoulders. Why? Why do I deserve this torture? Each and every day and night. Who are you all? Why do you do this to me? Malian said with an obvious stutter, as if every word pained him to say. I said so, Malian. You are worthless, and I will always be here to make you suffer. You are in denial, Malian. You know exactly who you are. You created us for one purpose, and you know what that purpose is. There is no escape, Malian. None at all. The ashy creature stated this with an anger and certainty so dark as to prove its inhumanity. The clock struck again with its deadly shriek. 23:59. The veiled creature lifted Malian up, his eyes downcast and despondent. Now you are mine, and you will suffer just like you deserve. I am worthless, I am repulsive, and I do not deserve happiness. Malian sang in a morose way, a sadistic lullaby. As every breath he took, he inhaled a part of the creature's veil. Every break revealing a faceless mask. Every repetition of the requiem seeming to strengthen the creature. You know it does not need to be like this. A light, ethereal voice responded over the room. The clock, back to its regular ticking, showing 000. The room began to revert to its original state. The brass chess set was returned. The ancient mirror was unmoved as ever, and the familiar picture returned into the view of Malian. His dormant eyes regaining their shine. As the creature dropped him and hissed back, being forced to fold and shrink into the painting as an angelic figure floated majestically down into the center of the room. There is an escape, Malian. A way you no longer need to deal with any of this. Take my hand, Malian. Trust me, I will help you. Malian held the painting close to his chest and looked closely at the figure. The halo around its head, leading to a bright smile. He knew if he took this step, there would be no way back. It would be permanent, and he wouldn't get any more chances. His hands moved forward, a slight hesitation as he looked at his possessions being squashed with determination. As their hands touched, Malian finally felt freedom. As he looked at the angel again, 2 red horns stood curved and proud, a deranged smile gracing his lips. But Malian didn't care. He felt nothing at all. As one final tear went down his cheek, he felt happy. Now I don't know what happened after this. Everything is a blur, as I felt the dark tendrils grip around my heart. I later found out that the person referenced throughout, Malian, was a teenager who had recently committed suicide. He was found at his house alone with his book and various other objects. Foul play was suspected, but this diary, even though written in third person, seems to show otherwise. Now I don't know what was happening with this kid. If it was all in his head, or if he really was seeing things. But ever since, I see the things he described. I know I sound insane, but I see them all, out of the corner of my eye, all smiling, all mocking me. I recently bought a book. I think I need to write something down. About 1.5 years ago, I started keeping a pretty regular dream journal. I started the journal basically just out of curiosity. I've always had trouble remembering my dreams to the point where I'm not sure I could describe a single dream I had before I started consistently writing them down. It's not that I don't remember things when I first wake up. It's just that those memories fade so quickly that by the time I've gotten out of bed, they might as well have never existed. At first, the journal keeping went great. I wouldn't wake up every morning with a fresh dream in my mind, but I was averaging 2 or 3 a week, and they were usually pretty entertaining, at least to me. Grocery stores filled with invented foods, dreams about keeping exotic pets, about riding impossibly huge cruise ships down comically tiny rivers, and a strangely high number of anxiety dreams about chasing down escaped lizards. Occasionally, I'd have a nightmare or something close to one, but to my surprise, writing those down actually helped me feel better about them. Looking back over these dreams the next day, they'd usually come across as more funny than scary. They never bothered me for too long, and they never repeated themselves, except for one dream in particular. I remember the exact date because that's how I started each journal entry. It was a little more than a year ago, November 17th, 2018. The date's not super important, except that it was a Saturday. I'll transpose the entry below. Saturday, November 17th, 2018. Nightmare. Woke up with a jolt of adrenaline and feeling very uneasy. I was in my childhood room, though my siblings weren't there with me. I think I was a kid again, but that's unclear. I woke up in my old bed, and my bedroom door was wide open. It was pitch black, definitely still nighttime, but I heard a noise from the dining room. It sounded like my mom was eating breakfast, and so I got up to go check. I walked through the hallway towards a faint beam of light streaming in through the gap at the bottom of the door at the end. The hallway went on for way longer than it should have, and the further I walked, the more I felt like something was behind me. I resisted the urge to turn around and look. It felt like something bad would happen if I did. I kept shuffling faster and faster until I was running as quickly as I could. The feeling that there was something behind me only grew more intense, and I wanted to get away from it. I felt like if I could just get to the door, everything would be fine. Finally, I got close enough to grab the handle. I twisted and pushed, and the door swung outward. At the end of the room was my mom, sitting there, eating a piece of toast and reading the newspaper, just like I knew she would be. I tried to yell out to her, to say good morning, but my voice wouldn't leave my throat. I began to run towards her, but I was being pulled backwards by something. It felt like I was being sucked up by a vacuum. I couldn't do anything but watch as I was slowly pulled back into the hallway and towards the presence I felt lurking there. My mom didn't even turn her head to look as I was pulled away. She didn't know I was there. It was terrifying. But I woke up before I could see what else was there with me. All in all, a fairly standard nightmare. Typical childhood fear or something. Not quite reaching the safety offered to you by your parents. Fear of darkness and monsters lurking beneath it, etc. It was scary, but didn't really stick out to me as too much at the time. By the next morning, I'd put it behind me. It wasn't until a week later that I thought about the dream again. I thought about it again because it repeated itself that night. Saturday, November 24th, 2018. Nightmare. Nearly the same dream as a few nights ago. Woke up at my childhood bedroom again. Felt like my mom was eating breakfast in the dining room, despite it being the middle of the night. Tried to get to her, but couldn't get her attention. Something terrifying was behind me the entire time, and I couldn't get away from it. The only difference that I can recall is that this time, as I was being pulled backwards, I heard the heater kick on. It felt like that's what I was being pulled backwards by. It felt like the heater itself had reversed and was sucking me in. And I could tell that the presence I felt earlier was waiting for me inside of it. It's pretty rare for me to have dreams repeat, but this still wasn't that alarming, all things considered. I just assumed that the original nightmare had affected me a bit more than I realized. It wasn't until about a month later that I started to get concerned. This little nightmare had become a weekly occurrence. Every week, to the day, the dream repeated. Each time, there'd be a new little detail. Nothing big, just small things. Things so small that I couldn't even always be sure whether they were actually new details or if I just hadn't noticed them before. Mostly, the world got more and more fleshed out. Posters on my walls became more specifically clear. Particular toys scattered across the floor would stick out to me. And at one point, I noticed my mom also had a mug of tea. It felt like writing all this down was causing more details to stick out and build towards a more complete picture. As I said earlier, writing down my nightmares had actually been a pretty positive thing for me, since it was often funny to reflect on the bizarre things that seemed scary to my unconscious brain. But this particular dream had started to worm its way into my subconscious and the waking world as well. I found myself tensing up whenever my own heater clicked on. And while I know it's dumb, I even went a few weeks sleeping with it off, just in case the sound of it turning on while I was sleeping had been triggering the dreams. It didn't help, though it did save me a few bucks on my utilities, so I guess there's that. The real issue, however, came when I went to visit my parents for the first time since the dreams had started. They still lived in that same house, and my old bedroom was still intact, though it was used for guests now, not me specifically. They lived within driving distance, but were still a few hours away. And so I spent the night there. I'd be lying if I said I wasn't a bit nervous about sleeping in my old room, but I couldn't exactly come up with any sort of reasonable excuse not to. To make matters even worse, it was a Saturday, the day of the week my nightmare had chosen as its own little reoccurring holiday. Predictably, that night was bad. I had the dream again, and true to tradition, it revealed another detail. A soft, rustling sound came from inside my closet, and I knew there was something in there. Something trying to be quiet. I guess I'd probably always known there was, but this confirmed it. The rest of the dream played out as usual. Only when I woke up, I was inside of that room for real. I'm not sure it's possible to accurately explain how scary that experience was. I think a lot of people know about night terrors and sleep paralysis. You've heard stories of people dreaming while awake. Well, this was a lot like that's described as, only I was fully lucid and in complete control over my body. I recorded the dream's new detail in my journal, and I was about to try and go back to sleep again, when I heard probably the last thing I ever wanted to hear in my current context. I heard the soft thud of a half-full mug being placed down gently on top of a wooden table. I obviously had no proof it was my mom, but, well, I'm not sure anyone in my position would reasonably believe otherwise. I didn't want to check. I wanted to go back to sleep, though I knew that was going to be pretty much impossible. But still, if I could just ignore it until morning, it'd be possible to write it off as, well, anything. It could have been my mind playing tricks on me. I could have still been half asleep. It could have been something outside that my brain misinterpreted. But it also could have been what I feared it really was. Before I could think about it too much longer, I heard another sound I absolutely did not want anything to do with. I heard a faint rustle coming from inside my closet. Well, that spurred me into action. I bolted upright, and though it's sort of embarrassing to admit, I sprinted out of my room and into the hallway. In retrospect, I should have flicked on the lights as I went, but I really wasn't thinking that clearly in the moment. I ran through the hallway, and although I suspect it only took a few steps, as I was now an adult and wasn't actually being pulled backwards by some unknown dream force, I felt that telltale tinge of fear creep up behind me. I felt like if I stopped moving, or even just glanced backwards, something very bad would happen. I grabbed the hallway door and pushed it open, and what I saw there is something I'll never forget, because at this point, I'd written it down weekly for over 2 months. There, all by herself in the middle of the night, sat my mom at the dining room table with a mug of hot tea and 2 slices of buttered whole wheat toast, reading the newspaper. It was simultaneously exactly what I expected, and the last thing I wanted to witness. Just as I started to process what was in front of me, I heard it from behind me. The deep clunk of the heater starting its next cycle. I screamed. This is thankfully where my dream and my reality branched. Hearing my yell, my mom started and whipped her head around to look in my direction. She looked as startled as I was, and asked me if everything was all right. I didn't really want to get into specifics, so I just told her I was having a nightmare and must have been sleepwalking. After talking for a few minutes, she confessed that she didn't remember how she'd come to be in the dining room either. It was odd, but she claimed she must have been sleepwalking too, which wasn't something she said happened very often. Both of us were a little unsettled, but by the next morning, the whole experience was nothing more than an amusing story that got repeated for Dad when he joined us for more appropriately timed and much less unsettling breakfast. That was the last time I wrote down any of my dreams. Now that I've gotten some perspective on the whole thing, I can recognize that there's a possible explanation for what happened. It could be that I'd seen my mom sleepwalk like that as a kid, and had the experience stick around in my subconscious. That would also explain why it happened again while I visited. It could have been a more regular occurrence than she let on. As humans, we instinctively seek patterns and form connections, so for the sake of my mental health, I decided it wasn't worth it to keep up the journal and risk fixating on that particular incident any longer. For about a month afterwards, I'd wake up on Saturday nights with a start, and the same reoccurring nightmare fresh in my mind. But I stopped writing things down, or even reflecting on them. After that month, the regularity of the nightmares started to wane. I'd have one occasionally, but they'd skip a week or two, and the memory of them would fade more quickly than usual. As I write this today, I couldn't even tell you the last time I had that dream specifically. I do still wake up with a jolt every now and then, and I have the vague memories of the occasional nightmare, but I couldn't tell you anything more about those dreams than the feelings that linger for a minute or two after I regain consciousness. I think most dreams are essentially nonsense, but I could believe that there's some truth to the idea of them occasionally reflecting buried anxieties or fears from deep within our unconscious minds. Some people analyze their dreams and seem to get a lot out of doing it, but after my experiences, I'm content in my conviction that some things are better off left alone and unexamined. There's a sort of power that writing has. It sounds obvious, but it cements things. It makes them real. Once something is written down, there's proof of its existence. It's no longer just something inside your head. I think maybe there are some things deep inside of us that are looking for a little bit of extra help to cross the gap that separates our unconscious minds and our conscious ones. If something can form that connection, then just maybe it's not too wild to imagine that it could go a little further We make the leap from our conscious mind to our physical reality. I'm not sure I fully believe that, but I think that some part of me is afraid that it might be true. And after my experience, why I'm no longer interested in reaching out into the darkness and seeing what latches on. Ever since I was a child, I was obsessed with mountains. The beautiful sights, the winding snowy vistas. Climbing to the peak covered in a thick white blanket and seeing a seemingly endless horizon. Simply the sheer size and scale of mountains seemed so endearing to a young me, and ever since I've been researching, reading, and during high school, occasionally going on hiking trips to tall hills with my dad, as it was one of the few things we both enjoyed doing together. But I've never gotten the chance to go to a real mountain, one with winding paths, steep cliffs, and a thick layer of snow just to add to its beauty. That was why I was so excited to see that email in my inbox. When I got out of high school, I was ecstatic for college. I was so excited to pave a way for my life on my own. It also helped that when I was a kid, I was told that I needed some type of college degree to have a decent job and to become successful like many of us in our generation. Little did I know, I'd end up here in this shitty apartment with nothing but $5,000 of debt to my name in an attempt to make something of myself. And to top it all off, I was recently unemployed. A day like any other, wasting away at my computer, I had gotten an email. The title read, "Looking for experienced hikers for seasonal work." The first paragraph reads, "Are you tired of your average office job? And are you looking for something more exhilarating? Something involving the outdoors? We are in need of an ambitious worker that is willing to spend a week in our mountain and survey the local area. Requirements: must be 21 years of age, must have intermediate to advanced hiking experience. If you are interested, reply to this email with your resume, and we will respond to you shortly." At first, I was surprised. I didn't think there was work out there like this. I was thinking that it was probably my computer reading my search history to target ads towards me due to my recent pathetic Google searches, including how to survive on a minimum wage budget and, of course, mountain screensavers. But I could be overthinking things. I've always been told I was a paranoid person. From thinking my teachers were personally out to get me when I was a kid, to trying to figure out what the mailman really was peeping on my mom. There always seemed to be something to worry about, including this email. Looking at the email, I noticed their contact information at the bottom of the page. I clicked on it, surprised that it even went somewhere. The link leads to a site that just seemed to be nothing more than a basic architectural company focusing on building structures for parks and as such. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary, so I thought, what the hell, and sent in my resume. Signed off my computer and decided to go to bed at a decent time for once. The next day I found a reply in my inbox saying that they wanted to schedule an interview and have it over the phone. They also told me what exactly I would be doing for them. Apparently, all I needed to do was set up these beacon devices around the face of the mountain over the course of 3 days, staying in one of their on-site cabins. Simple enough, I thought. I was surprised to see that they even considered my resume, considering what little was even on it, but nevertheless, I realized that this was the first good opportunity I had in a while. The interview itself was pretty mundane, with an interviewer sounding uninterested, saying how they needed someone that was willing to travel to Colorado and stay for a week, and that they would pay half of the pay promised there at the administrative building, and give the other half when I got back. I say that due to recent events, my schedule was open and that I was willing to start as soon as possible. And before I knew it, I was on a plane to Colorado with my old hiking gear, some food rations, and a map of their site with the tagline, "The Future of Park Entertainment," written on the bottom of the brochure. The ride there was pretty mundane. After I got off the plane, I took an Uber to their park property and took a short hike up the north face to see where I would be staying for the next week. And, well, the cabin they advertised in the email was nothing more than a large, glorified one-room shack with a cot, a table with what looked to be an old radio, and a small fireplace with some logs and newspaper, which I assumed is to be used for kindling. I was too tired from the trip that I didn't even have the energy to complain, and fell onto the cot and passed out. The next day, I woke up feeling excited for something for the first time since college. Downed a food ration packet of what was labeled beef stew, but tasted more like watered-down gravy, and headed out on my hike. I had points on my map where I had to place the beacons in a pattern that simply looked like the perimeter of the north face of the mountain. The hike started out pretty enjoyable, although difficult with unpaved terrain and some snow still left from the winter season melting away. I planted beacons at specific places on the map and marked trees with my jackknife to prevent myself from getting lost. Realizing that this mountain is a lot bigger than the map would have you believe. At noon, I stopped to rest and have another ration. Towards the end of the day, I continued making my rounds until I noticed what looked to be a dead animal leaning against a rock formation that looked to be the size of a fox. I wasn't too startled. When you've been hiking as long as I have, you begin to see the cruelty of nature. But as I got closer, I noticed that the animal almost looked inflated, like its limbs and bodies were stretched and pumped, and the skin inflamed to the point where I could no longer recognize what animal it used to be. The body also had a strong scent of what smelled like salt. It was confusing to even look at. I continued my hike, attempting to rationalize what I saw. Was it some poor animal torn open and eaten? But that still didn't explain why its body was so stretched, and that strange smell. I decided that it wasn't worth worrying about the animal, and remembering that strange things always seem to happen in the woods. The thought of bringing back depressing memories of stumbling across dead squirrels strung up in trees as a child. I continued my hike, yet the image of that dead thing was still in the back of my mind. When I got back to my cabin, I ran around the other side to look off the cliff at the mountain range. The sight was breathtaking, and something I was surprised that I could see at this point in my life. Then I started to notice something. If you've ever noticed that if you stare at something still for too long, you start to notice movement where you haven't before, like you notice something in the corner of your eye, or you may feel like something is moving around behind certain trees or rocks. Mixed with the trees swaying in the wind, it looked like that mountain was alive. A beautiful yet eerie sight. I got back to my cabin to have another tasty packet of mush and to see what was on the local radio. And in recent news, locals have been reporting a strong salt-like odor resonating in areas in the nearby forest. Researchers still cannot figure out what could be causing this strange phenomenon. But in other news, click. I turned off the radio. It was late at night, and I'm stranded in a shack on that mountain. The last thing I need to do is worry about some strange salt smell in the woods that I have also noticed emanating from that strange carcass. I was getting ready to lay back to bed when I noticed a pack of tall deer running past a tree around 100 feet from my cabin. I was only able to see the last two dash behind a large rock, but was still able to appreciate the sight of nature that I've been starved for. The next day, I woke up feeling refreshed. I tore open another food packet and was listening to a local radio station when I started to remember how my dad taught me how to send a distress signal using a radio, thinking it's good information to keep in my mind when stuck on this mountain by myself. I started my hike when I noticed that it was a bit cloudy that morning. When I started to notice the faint salt smell, I tried to ignore it and just enjoy my work. I was reminiscing on the days that I used to hike with my dad and what few memories we shared together, in a bittersweet kind of way. I was astonished that for the first time I had a job that I really enjoyed doing. I was hoping I could work more for this company or other companies that are in need of similar work. Maybe I should be a freelancer of sorts. I was brainstorming other career paths when I noticed that it started to snow heavily. I hiked up what looked like an old path, now abandoned, took a left turn around a small cliff, and noticed a large cave. Realizing that I finished about a third of my trip for the day, feeling exhausted from the hike, and now what looks like is going to be a snowstorm, I decided to take a break in the entrance of the cave. I sat down, snacking on a Cliff Bar, looking around the cave, and noticed how it reminded me of an old rock formation in my local park where many teens and couples would carve their names into the sides. Except this cave has no carvings, chips, nothing. In fact, it looked to be completely untouched by man. I looked deeper into the cave and started to notice something pink standing out from the dark shadows. I pointed my flashlight around the cave and realized it was coating the walls. Curiosity got the better of me. I got up to get a closer look, and what was covering the walls looked exactly like the dead animal I saw the day prior, except in much smaller pieces and clinging to the wall. I continued to walk down the tunnel. I wanted to turn back, but something was pulling me deeper into it. The cave itself was beckoning me. The fleshy lumps were getting larger and more spread out. Tendrils stretched and buried deep within the cracks to cling to the ceiling like some kind of parasite. My head began to spin, attempting to rationalize what I was witnessing. Was this some kind of fungus growth? Impossible, it was so large. It was nothing I've ever seen before. The tunnel was compelling me to trek deeper, the air getting thicker with that pungent salt smell growing stronger. At this point, the walls and ceiling were tangled with these long, fleshy strands of whatever was infesting this mountain, when suddenly I realized that I couldn't remember where I was. I was turning around, confused at where I was going, where the entrance of the cave was. I started murmuring to myself, questioning what I was doing. The walls looked to be moving, stretching, spinning, folding. The walls itself looked as if it was breathing. My quiet murmuring quickly turned to screams, screeching at the top of my lungs as I plunged into insanity and fear, feeling as I was becoming a part of the horrendous infestation when suddenly I heard deep, crackling noises coming from my right, deeper into the cave. I turned to see something casting a shadow against the wall, a tall, hunched-over silhouette. I started running the other direction with my eyes closed in an attempt to stop myself from witnessing the walls and whatever was casting that shadow. After what felt like an eternity of running, I started to feel the cold once again. I opened my eyes and discovered I was at the entrance of the cave, and what was starting as a light snow turned into a full blizzard. I began running to my cabin, refusing to look back. I started to feel my legs burning and beginning to let out, while the rest of my body was freezing as I desperately sprinted my way back. When I finally got back to the cabin, I slammed the door and looked out the window to see nothing. The snowfall was so thick that I could barely see 10 feet in front of me. My mind began to clear up, and I realized I needed to stay warm. I threw 2 logs and some newspaper in the fireplace in an attempt to start a fire. I was trying to start the fire when what I just witnessed came back into mind. What the hell was in that cave? And what was making me act so insane? I thought, My mind was spinning, even attempting to rationalize it, and decided to just focus on making the fire, although my head was still racing. When I finished the fire, I jumped at the radio and started to send out a distress call to anyone who would be listening. I then looked out the window to witness what is now stained into my mind. I looked out my window to see that monster I saw in the cave, standing, hunched, yet still managing to reach around 8 feet tall, with long, stilt-like legs outstretched, arms crooked and tense, with black, leathery skin stretched across its body, its dark silhouette standing out in the winding snowstorm. Its head shaped like an elk, with antlers long and winding in an abnormal swirling pattern, and its eyes were a color I have never seen before, nothing ever seen on Earth before. Looking at them closely, they seemed to be swirling and spinning, and they were staring straight back at me with an unbreakable gaze. The look only a predator would give something that was their prey. Behind it, there were 3 black shapes, with a blizzard obscuring whatever they were, only assuming they were more of whatever that horrendous creature is. Before I could react, I blacked out. The next thing I remember is waking up, feeling like I was given a concussion. I woke up in the fetal position. I raised my head to witness my arms and legs submerged in a fleshy mass surrounded by 3 of those things. The floor, the walls, the ceiling, all covered in that thin, fleshy wrap, all seemingly twisting, stretching, folding. I looked into the eyes of the creature before me, those dark, spinning eyes. He reached out with his claws, resting it on my head, and his eyes began to glow. And what I saw is now burned into my mind. What I saw was a world in perpetual torment, a world where civilizations were built and crumbled just to witness another raise and to fall again. A world tearing at the seams with petty conflicts and raging wars. Civilizations being built with great technology, just to see it used to tear each other apart, from flaming arrows to flying bombs scorching this very earth. I've seen everything that has happened, everything that will happen. We are the remnants of a lost civilization, torn apart by its history of self-genocide, and all we are is just another race crippled by our own hubris. We spend our entire history killing our own kind. We attempt to justify it and even see our wars as honorable. Is killing our own kind in an attempt to gain temporary power really seen as honorable? All it is another senseless tragedy. One day, the rulers of our society will launch the bombs that took decades of research and technological advancement to achieve, just to reach a mutually assured destruction. And once there is nothing left but the smoldering pile of our ashes, another society would build to begin the cycle anew. We knew nothing but war. The next thing I remember is waking up to the sound of a whirling helicopter. I was on a stretcher, wrapped in a thick blanket, looking up at what I presumed to be my rescuer. I passed out again, to wake up to blinding lights and the sounds of beeping. I was in a hospital bed, with a nurse by my side. "He's up," I heard her say calmly behind a curtain. Out strolled a man in a white coat that I presumed to be a doctor. "You're one lucky bastard, you know that? I'm surprised the rescue team even found ya," he said affirmatively. "It was smart what you did. Pulled some real Star Wars shit. I don't even think I could have done something like that." What? Was all I was able to muster in my confused state. "Do you not remember what happened? The rescue team found you after the storm in the cut-open carcass of an elk outside of a cave on the north face. The blood stood out pretty well in the snow. They said if you didn't do that, you would have frozen out there. Impressive." The next couple of days were a haze. I made it home, not even bothering to pick up the rest of my pay. The only thing I had on my mind was whatever the hell those creatures were and what they had forced me to witness. When I got home, I attempted to research what those things were, and I couldn't find anything. No mention of these strange creatures in the mountains. No tall tales or urban legends of monsters in the hills of Colorado. Nothing. I don't understand what they are, or why they showed me what they did. And I don't believe I wish to know. All I know now is that there are things out there not meant for humans to witness. And God help anyone who has had to see what I've seen.